Welcome to the Lights On podcast, featuring stories behind building and running successful hotel businesses. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Lights On podcast. I'm Kim Seo, CEO of Lights On, and your host today. On this podcast, we share stories from across hospitality about building and growing hotel businesses. This episode is sponsored by Lights On. Lights On helps hotels grow revenue more consistently by managing price, distribution, and digital marketing together. We help hotels identify new revenue opportunities so they don't leave money on the table. We also run the full revenue and marketing operation so the team on the ground can stay focused on the guest experience. If your hotel needs more revenue growth, visit lightson.co to learn more. My guest today is a legendary on the island of Hawaii, Geoff Graf, VP of Business Development at Hogan Hospitality. Geoff, being a VP of Business Development at Hogan Hospitality, and it is a family-owned hotel management company with over 3,000 rooms across Hawaii and on the mainland of America. Geoff has spent the past 40 years in the Hawaiian hospitality scene. He started as he started back in early 20s, right, on Oahu, and really worked your way up to general manager across some of the Hawaii's most recognized hotel companies. Aston, Aqua, outrigger, you've done it all. And then you moved into the business development role where you really double Aqua Hospitality's portfolio from 14 to 29 hotels and help engineer at the time, probably like the merger of the biggest Hawaii's largest management company, Aqua Aston. And from there, you now lead business development for one of the few family-owned operators, Hogan Hospitality, and it's a big competition against all the other private equity-backed groups. So super excited to hear all those stories. Geoff, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. Your intro is very generous.
Oh, I feel like it's still underwhelmed to some extent, just like you are such a legend. 40 years. So why don't we...
Ken, being a legend sometimes is also just a nice way to say you're old.
Hey, you take some experience to actually see through the stories and ups and downs of the industry, right? So I think it will be just good digging in some of the stories. Why don't we almost like wind back to the 80s, right? Because you started hospitality back in the 80s, right? When you first came to Oahu, in your early 20s, and you really worked your way up to like getting, being a general manager across all of these, some of the biggest management companies in Hawaii. Can you tell us what was that climb like? And what did those early years teach you that, you couldn't learn any other way?
Well, I guess it's also, I should start by saying, I'm somewhat of an accidental hotelier. I didn't plan on being in the hotel business. In 1983, when I moved to Hawaii, I was actually playing rugby, and my rugby coach was managing a small boutique hotel on the foot of Diamond Head. He didn't like me working in the bar where I was a doorman, other words, a bouncer. So he told me I was going to come work for him. So I started in the hotel business as a houseman. At a small 60-room boutique hotel, and worked my way up from there. A lot of it happened to be in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people. I wasn't as knowledgeable then as I think I am now, and I realized later how fortunate I really was by being able to work with some of the individuals I worked with early on in my career. And they're the ones that I really owe a lot to as far as my progress in being able to work my way up, as you said, from a houseman to a guest service manager, to eventually general manager, and then moving on to other bigger hotels, moving to different islands. That also is a big part of um, the industry when you're trying to move up. You're not necessarily going to do it in one spot. You need to be flexible and move. You had mentioned that I had worked for several management companies in Hawaii. Um, and the reason I did that and didn't go, say, the Hyatt or Hilton route or Marriott, was because I wanted to stay in Hawaii. I had moved here from Southern California when I was 22, and I didn't want to go anywhere else. So that's ultimately how I ended up with Aqua Aston, Outrigger before that, and wanted to raise a family here and be a part of the community. So again, I was extremely fortunate, especially seeing as how I kind of got into the business by accident.
Yeah. And I noticed that through my research, so during that time, you were actually gone and just left the industry for a few years and focus on your like the athletic career, right? You came as a rugby player, but sounds like you're coming here, you're doing a lot more the water sports and all that, and you were literally spending a few years in between your career to do that. Just curious more on that experience, and as you came back to hospitality, how did that experience shape how you look at things differently?
Well, I look back at that time period, and you're right, I did leave. I turned 30, and I had some opportunities to travel through sport that it was going to be hard to pass up, and I wouldn't have later on in life. So I did what a lot of people thought was crazy. I happened to be the youngest GM in the company that I was working for at the time. And I said, "Hey guys, I'm going to leave." And they're like, "Well, where are you going to go?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going to go anywhere except for travel." And they thought I was crazy. And financially, yeah, it was pretty crazy to do. But I took 3 years off, traveled to places like South Africa, to Australia, New Zealand, a lot of West Coast stuff. Being able to travel for sport, both outrigger canoe paddling and surf ski paddling, and doing races and so forth. And actually got ranked in the world rankings for a little while there. So it was a time period that I couldn't have done otherwise. The lessons learned really was one, traveling and getting that experience from the guest perspective. Although a lot of it was not necessarily staying in the finest hotels and so forth. It was a different type of experience. Although we did get some nice hotels. But the coming back with that experience and coming back a little bit more knowledgeable, both from the standpoint of um, understanding employees and their desires, their goals, what they want to do in their lives, the freedom that they might need to have in order for them to fully develop. Because I count that time period as helping me to fully develop into somebody that came back, was hungry, needed to work. I had fallen in love, so I definitely needed to work and start to be responsible. I had a family that wasn't necessarily happening right then, but it was going to happen. That was the plan. And so when you come back and you're thinking that way, you look at things a little bit differently than I did when I was in my 20s, where I looked at it as a job. When I came back, I looked at it as this is the financial means for me to provide for my family. Uh, it's also a very good job to have in Hawaii. So if I'm gonna stay in Hawaii, I'm going to need to get serious about this. And I did pay my dues when I came back. The company that I had been working for, which this takes people back quite a long ways, but it was a company called Colony Hotels and Resorts, and they eventually ended up getting acquired by Outrigger. At least their management agreements did, as they left the state. But they took me back and they sent me to Molokai. Not a whole lot of people go to Molokai
Nope.
as a career choice, but it was another great experience being able to go over to what was formerly a Sheraton resort, having a golf course, having a full service hotel that also had issues in terms of occupancy and some ownership issues where they had some finance issues and so forth. So it was a struggling property. It was a struggle on the island because the island didn't have the lift to get your guest in. So you had to get really creative being over there. Being under those circumstances taught me a whole lot about managing a hotel, as you know, and everybody probably listening to this type of a podcast would realize. It's really easy to manage a hotel when it's making money, it's running high occupancies. That's great. When it's not making money and it's not running high occupancies for whatever reason, you've got to get creative. You've got to look at different ways of doing business, how to get your message out and so forth. And remember, this is at this point in time, it's in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. And we didn't have all the tools that we have now. We depended on getting our business in different ways. So it was quite an experience, but it was a jumping point for me. That's how I ultimately ended up getting into outrigger hotels, which was a goal of mine, because they were family-owned business. They were, based here in Hawaii. They were also expanding at the time. I happened to know some of the family members, the Kelly family, and it was just goal. So that worked out well for me. And then my next spot was moving over to Maui for a little while, and then to Kauai, and then back to Honolulu. So that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't first, done the crazy thing and left the business for a few years and then come back. And I don't know if I would have, had the experience necessary as quickly as I feel that I got it if I had not gone to a property such as Kaluakoi Resort and Golf Club over on Molokai. And Molokai kind of holds a special place in my heart anyways. As you may be aware, or it's the starting off point for the World Championship of outrigger canoe racing. And there's several other races that start there. I got married there.
Wow.
While I was the GM of the hotel, it was the best place to do it.
That's great.
Anyways, it does hold a very special place in my heart. But from a business perspective, it definitely taught me a lot very quickly on certain aspects of the hotel business. So I ended up being better for it.
Yeah, and I think it's not just a industry or career lessons, but a life lessons, right? Sometimes, anything career-wise or anything is not necessarily linear, right? So sometimes you take a detour, but it might be serving you the best. And it's just from what I'm hearing, there's no regret on that experience. And honestly, if you back then turned down on that opportunities, to travel with spot and all that, I'm sure you probably like were feeling more regret than not, than actually like doing it. So uh it was lovely. And actually one more follow-up question on that, and then we can move on to other areas. So thinking about your effort to turn around the struggling properties in Molokai. Obviously back in the 90s, to your point, not, you're not having the same set of tool that what we would all have today, thanks to technology advancement. Um, if you think about something that you did back then that is still effective, it could be, still could be used by like the hoteliers nowadays, right? When it comes to time of uncertainty, kind of what we're having right now. What are the things that wouldn't change that you think will still be effective after, decades of time?
Well, I mean, you have to remember that this is before OTAs. The biggest producers to Hawaii at the time were our wholesale travel partners. Um, Pleasant Hawaiian Holidays being the largest, and it's the family I work for now, although they sold that part of their business many years ago. Um, but that's what we did. Uh, in that unique experience on Molokai, and to some degree on some of the other neighbor islands, but on that unique experience, I mentioned we had lift issues. So fortunately, we had a startup airline that was starting to bring more and more people into the island. So we had to work closely with them to get more lift coming into the island. We had to create some things that they could package and sell. So we were doing a lot of that on our own. For this particular property, we had a couple of buildings that were actually mothballed, so to speak. I had mentioned that the ownership was struggling, didn't have a whole lot of financial resources, or didn't want to put a lot of financial resources into the property at the time. So we had some buildings that we had cannibalized. It even started before I got there. TVs and phones. And you got to remember the TVs back then were like box
The big
TVs,
box. Yeah.
and the phones were dial up. Um, as a matter of fact, that property actually had a switchboard that still required an operator to plug things in. So it was quite unique. But what we did is we looked at this and we looked at where's our highest demand periods, and are we selling out during those time periods? And we were, and it was weekends and it was golf packages. But because we had a couple of buildings mothballed, we couldn't maximize that. We were actually successful in getting enough lift in over the weekends that we could bring golfers in, but we didn't have enough operable rooms to do it. So we created another room category and we called it the Pakeli rooms, and it became the Pakeli package. Pakeli in Hawaiian is escape. So we kind of said, we're going to be like Kona Village. We're not going to have TVs or phones in the room. This is your opportunity to come to Molokai and escape. The reality is we didn't have phones or TVs to put in the rooms. But it was our lead-in package, and it worked. We were able to bring more guests in, fill more rooms over those weekends, and drive some revenue. Being a full-service property, the only way for us to fill our restaurant was to bring guests in. There's not a whole lot of eating opportunities on Molokai, although there are some really good ones in town. But our guests weren't going there. They needed to be on the resort. It was somewhat remote. So again, it was the creativity part of it that you needed to look at in order to do things back then, without the OTAs, without things. Of course, we worked with our travel partners, but it was in a different manner. It wasn't as quick. So, you know, doing some of the same things, just doing it a little bit differently, than we're able to do now. Now we're able to move a lot faster, I believe.
Yeah. And Geoff, but I still gotta say, there's just so many golden nuggets from that experience that's so applicable today, right? I think kind of the two key things that I extracted out is one, uh, sure, like, now we have OTAs, now we have, the e-commerce web direct things but many, I think hotel owners and operators, they still kind of like, overlook on the distribution, right? All the other opportunities that you could get more business in, right? Thinking about wholesale, direct sales, then, well, us in Hawaii, right? I think it's still more relationship based where like many hotel sales managers, they still keep those relationship with lots of the, Japanese wholesalers and things like that. But, in the mainland, especially for newer operators, sometimes like they forget about these opportunities that, it's not just a either or, it's not just web direct and OTA. When you actually have opportunities to build a more diversified distribution, right? I think that it is still very applicable in the modern world. I think that's one. And the other part is like thinking about using sometimes disadvantage to your advantage through creative storytelling. We just had a show the other day with Brand Shiratori, who is actually the previous global brand director at Outrigger. We just had good stories about how like not every property is on the beachfront. Like, not everybody has the luxury of the locations. And at that point, you have to be very creative about telling the story to attract people coming in and check out what's going on. Like when you mentioned about, the escape package where it's actually very it feel like we have this trend again today, right? People just getting so mind boggled with, the technology. Like, they might be looking at similar experience in trying to be doing all this like wellness escape. It's just funny that, you already doing that, back in the days. And I think all of these are still very relevant to how hoteliers should be running their properties today.
Yeah, it was like a form of getting unplugged before we had the term being unplugged. So,
Kind of switching gear a little bit. So, um, being a GM, right, at the time was kind of like your goal, right? I think it's like the goal of many hoteliers starting from, the bottoms and rise up. It feels like, that's almost like the end goal, being a GM of a property, right? So after that, you move on from being a GM to getting into business development side of things. Was there a moment where you realized that you wanted to grow a company through business development versus just running a property as a GM?
it's a great question. I'm going to try to provide you with a good answer. There was a little in between being a GM and getting into business development. I became a consultant. I became an asset manager. Went out on my own. And when I first did that, I actually consulted back to outrigger hotels, just as an independent. And through that process, I really gained more insight into the owner's perspective. Prior to that, I was working always for the management company. So my view was from the management company's side of things. Going into consulting and then asset management, I started to see it from the owner's perspective. So that provided me with what I felt was the tools to be able to kind of meld both sides and make it work for everybody. And today, working with Hogan Hospitality, my boss, Gary Hogan, views things the same way. He's told me, many times, look, if it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work for us. And he's told me I wouldn't sign that as an owner. So we look at things from that perspective, and by becoming, leaving a pretty good position, I felt at the time, as a general manager for the Outrigger Reef Hotel in Waikiki, which was the biggest hotel for Outrigger hotels, and going out on my own, again, was not it was an uncommon thing to do. But doing that furthered my own education in what works in the industry, what you need to look for, and how to best provide um, a management service, make it work for the owner, and I like to say, look, we're not going to create an agreement that basically is just telling us when we're going to get divorced. We want to create an agreement that keeps the marriage in place. So, that's what we work towards. We try to be very flexible when we look at it that way. And again, going back to being fortunate in who I worked for, that's how it came about. As a matter of fact, I was asset managing for a hotel when I first met Ben Rafter, who had just joined Aqua Hotels. And Aqua Hotels, again, was being led by Mike Pollan, who is truly a legend in Hawaii hospitality. And eventually, I went to work for Aqua. A bit on the operational side in the beginning, quickly turned into the business development side, working alongside another legend in the business, Bill Henderson, who had worked with Outrigger and helped grow Outrigger into the South Pacific and beyond, back in the 90s. So you got to look at your opportunities as they present themselves, and don't be afraid to jump. Yeah, you need to go. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of and really recognize the quality of the people that you're working for, and do that. So that's how I ended up in business development. Plus, I saw all the fun places that Bill Henderson was traveling to, and he didn't have employees to manage or anything like that. And I thought, well, hey, that's the job that I want to have. So I was fortunate to work with him for several years at Aqua. And you had said that we had grown the company from 14 to 29. Kind of lost count what we did during that time, but for me to take any kind of credit there, I was a part of a team that did that. And that's what it takes to grow a company, is to have the right individuals in the right positions on your team to make that happen.
Yeah. And with that, obviously everyone is, has a contribution to that result. And thinking about on that part, right? With such a quick result, scaling, almost like doubling the portfolio, right? And obviously later on with, the acquisition of that between, the merger between Aqua and Austin. So the portfolio really grows up by a lot. So in that case, obviously on the business management side, business development side is great. Operationally, with that fast of a scale, what breaks first? It's got to be something of a growing pain with that fast growth, that the original systems or processes that would break with that scale. What was that like, and how would those situations be handled?
Well, as an example, and I believe this was both at Outrigger, who grew rapidly, during that time period. And then with Aqua, at Aqua, I know some of the strain points were your accounting department. How many properties can an accountant handle? I know we were adding junior accountants all the time, and we were running out of space all the time. Just within Aqua, within the same building, I think I moved my office 4 or 5 times. Um, and usually it wasn't much of an office, and I was usually sharing it with somebody. As a matter of fact, I think every time I was sharing it with somebody. Um, so you have physical constraints, you have personnel restraints. I recall one time, sitting, we were having an executive session and we were announcing that we were bringing on a new property. And our marketing department said, whoa, 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 wait, wait. We can't handle another property right now. We can't bring them on that fast. And we said, well, you're going to have to figure out a way because it's coming on and it's coming on in like 2 weeks. So, you're right. There are definitely straining points in when you're growing that fast. But it's just like as an individual, when you see an opportunity, don't be afraid to take it. Um, as a management company, you need to do that as well. Now, conversely, I've also been in the situation to where we've looked at, and this is more recently, where we've looked at our portfolio and said, hey, some of these properties don't make a lot of sense and they pull a lot of our resources. We need to look at ways to consolidate into a better platform of properties that makes sense for us and makes sense for the owner. We do better when we're able to have a concentration of properties in certain areas, have personnel in certain areas, versus getting too, in this case, we were a little too far flung. We had some small properties that were hard to get to. Some of our regionals had to drive through literally snowstorms to get to them. And they just didn't have the revenue to really make it worthwhile for us or the owner. So there are strain points, and it goes both ways. So you have to look at it. But in the case of growing, as you were pointing out, yeah, you've got to be ready to do that. In the cases where when I was with companies that were growing rapidly, you needed to have the resources available even before you were actually doing the growing. Now, we didn't always have it, and I can tell you that awards need to go out to a lot of people for the time they put in. The after the first of the month, I know the Aqua accounting department was working, till 11 midnight sometimes. They were calling in, bringing in pizzas all the time to keep everybody fed, just to get all the financials done and out by the 10th of the month for our owners. It was a strain on everybody. Not me. I wasn't working till midnight. Not in that case, but I was working till midnight doing some other things to bring some management agreements in. But it was probably a little bit more fun for me than it was for them.
Yeah, it just the cycles, right? And I think your time effort is going to be more upfront at the beginning of the deal versus like now on the operational side is different, right? So the pace of growing, I think that is a interesting point, which is a good segue into kind of the family-owned environment because has been the theme of our conversation today, having a family-owned and operated companies versus a companies that is backed by private equity capital and what have you. The the pace of growth can somewhat be controlled, right? Versus seeing kind of the case in Aqua and later on after the merger, Aqua Austin is kind of more like the, you know, architect, through capitalism, right? Versus now moving on to, kind of back to the family approach working at Hogan. Um, Kind of, how do you see that difference and what makes sense to, be part of a family-driven, family-operated approach versus something that is more like private equity backed? They're all looking at, the numbers of properties under management and trying to find aggressive way to grow that. What was that like, the difference? And obviously, which way you prefer? I kind of know the answer, but I would like to just get it from you.
Well, I can tell you there is a difference. And I don't know if this is going to stretch all the way across the board, but Outrigger Hotels was family owned at the time when I worked for them. Um, their approach was a little different, but they were big. They were, the 100-pound gorilla here in Hawaii, and they were expanding. But they had what I like to say is the family values in terms of how they operated. Um, and that was very much appreciated, and I learned a lot from it. The same goes for working for the Hogan family. When I first started working for them, I came in under a little bit of a different umbrella to work over with some development things over at Royal Lahaina Resort. Um, Eventually, that morphed into, hey, we've got all these resources. We know how to bring guests into Hawaii because Ed and Lynn Hogan started Pleasant Hawaiian Holidays in 1959. Between the Hogan family and the Kelly family, they really are responsible for bringing affordable tourism to Hawaii. The Kelly family had the affordable hotels, and the Hogan family was packaging affordable trips to Hawaii. So credit those two families for bringing this industry to where it is today. So looking at that, the idea was, so, well, why don't we become a management company? And so I transitioned again back into a biz dev role, and we started looking around. But being family owned and with some of the changes that had occurred, as you've mentioned, all the private equity, the big guys here, acquiring hotels, the atmosphere had changed a little bit. So when we were approaching it, when we were looking at it, it was a little bit differently. It was, we want to grow responsibly. We don't want to go too fast. We don't want to be the biggest. We don't want to have a hotel on every corner in Waikiki to where we're basically competing against each other. So I asked the question of Gary Hogan. I said, well, how patient are you? Because it takes time, and we're not known as a management company right now. So we went through that process. Hogan Hospitality Group, the name, was born out of that process. And we started, working towards getting some management agreements. Fortunately, I had a relationship with an owner on Kauai who approached us. We had actually gone over just to look at some rooms one time, but I always stayed in touch. I consider this owner a friend. And at some point in time, he asked us, would you consider coming over and managing our property? So that was our first property to bring into our management portfolio. And we still have it today, as you know. You're very familiar with it.
A mutual
Uh,
client of ours. Yes.
yeah. And that's the one property where I definitely stay more involved from an operational standpoint. So I appreciate that. Um, it allows me to say I still do a little bit of ops, and so forth. But that wasn't, we didn't want to just get one property here and so forth. We'd love to have a property in Waikiki. We would love to have another property on Maui. We had one on Maui, and we could go into that later. But um, then we wanted to expand to the mainland, and what's the best way to expand to the mainland? Again, Hogan family is being very patient in terms of how we approach this. So I had been involved previously with acquiring a mainland management company during my Aqua days, and we started kind of looking around, and eventually found a small management company based out of Northern California. At the time, I think they had, well, by the time we did the acquisition, I think they were at 15 hotels, maybe 14. Um, but we were able to acquire them. And one of the things we looked for was a management company that was very lean in its operation, because we didn't want to be, a big guy coming in and then laying everybody off because we already have those resources elsewhere. So we were able to come in and acquire a management company and keep everybody. And to this day, um, most of them still work for us. As a matter of fact, we acquired that from that management company from an individual who was looking for a way to retire, but to keep his employees still employed and working for the company. And his senior VP is now our president of the mainland operation. And she's doing a great job. We couldn't do it without her. And we've grown the mainland properties. At one point in time, I think we were up to 27. We've shrunk that a bit, but we've kept our room count about the same number, about 3,400 rooms. I always say about because, as you know, sometimes you have a hotel going out, sometimes you have a hotel coming in. But we're right around 3,400 rooms now. And we've done that by, I mentioned earlier, we looked at our portfolio and we decided, okay, what makes sense? And we consolidated a little bit. So we looked at the size of hotel we should be managing. Should we be managing a 20-room inn in Sheridan, Wyoming? Probably not. Doesn't make sense for us, doesn't make sense for the owner. So we settled on a room count that is kind of our sweet spot, which is about 100 rooms or more. And I think our average, if we average everything out these days, our average room count is right around 140 for the hotels. We have some 300 room properties. We have some 200. We have some legacy properties that we acquired when we acquired the company that are less than 100. But they're legacy properties, and we work well with the owners, and they do well. They're also what I like to refer to as geographically friendly. So we can support those hotels. We might have a larger hotel in the area with some more senior people. Our regionals can get around a little easier. So we went from being with the mainland side of the business, from being in California, Arizona, Texas, Wyoming, Utah, to now we're basically in California and Arizona. So it's easier for us to physically visit our properties. We do a lot remotely, but we have somebody there on a regular basis to to check on the properties, make sure our people are doing well, that they have everything they need. And so I think I've probably gone beyond your question, but that's what we did in order to grow our company, and the difference between rapidly growing as we were doing with Aqua, and I'm not divulging any secrets when I say Aqua was growing rapidly because Aqua was growing to be acquired. We are not growing to be acquired. We are growing to sustain ourselves for the long term and create long-term relationships. It's probably the biggest difference between us as a family-owned company and another company that, because acquisitions happen all the time. That's what happened with Aqua. They got acquired by Aston's parent company at the time, and created another bigger management company. So with us, we're not looking at it that way. We're looking at it as, okay, long-term growth, long-term opportunities for the individuals that work for us, and long-term relationships with our owners.
Yeah. And it's such a luxury to be willing to say no and have an owner with that patience, right? To be able to have all those sustainable growth that you mentioned, and which it's such a peace of mind when your clients know that this is like how you guys operate. I think it's also peace of mind that hey, the property or the property owners or your clients is not just merely a number on your spreadsheet, because at some point just like many PE-backed company, they just want to be aggregate, move up, get bigger, and sell at a higher multiple, right? Which in this case, yeah, it's such a luxury for for you working for the company, for Hogan as a company, as well as for your clients, which is amazing, and it's so the kind of right now, I mean, obviously you have the luxury of crafting your ideal client profile, right? Property set slightly bigger in Arizona, California, 100 keys and above. That kind of tends to work best for your company's economics. So for properties that are smaller than that, because we have a lot of like independents and boutique hotels, operators, and owners that are far less than that numbers, right? We constantly deal with properties that are 20 and 30 rooms. Mostly the owners, they have to be the owner operators running that, but at some point, they want to get to a point that it can be delegated and start having a management company, help them with the operations. So what would be your tips and tricks for like how smaller hotel owners and operators think about when it comes to finding an outside management company to help them?
Well, you're right that the smaller hotels need to generally be owner operators. And don't get me wrong, I actually love small boutique properties. If I have a choice to stay somewhere, I'm probably going to choose a small boutique property. When we acquired the company on the mainland, I personally, before we acquired it, went to every single hotel they managed. And my favorite was a 15-room property in Fort Bragg, which is really hard to get to, Fort Bragg, California. And unfortunately, we don't have it anymore. It did go owner operator. It just didn't make sense for anybody. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful property. But it needed to be an owner operated property. I think where those smaller properties, and let me be clear, we still look at, and we still have some properties in our portfolio that are under 100 rooms. The difference really is what type of ADR, what kind of revenue can that property generate? If it can generate enough revenue, then it can make sense. and we'll look at it. But it's got to generate enough revenue for them to be able to afford, if it's a small property, the luxury of a management company, and for us to make enough money off of it, because that's our business, is to make it worthwhile and pay attention to it. And we also look at geography. Where is it located? If it's located, again, someplace where it's easy to get to, we might have other resources in the area, then we'll consider it. Given its, whatever revenue it's producing. So it's not to say that a management company can't work with a small property, but we need to make it work so it works for both sides. So generally, you're right. Yeah, needs to be an owner operator if it's a really small property. Where I think most of those type of properties could use help is, maybe they have an asset manager. I don't know if that really makes sense for a small property. The owners should be close enough to it that they can operate it and pay attention to it. But where they really need help usually is an area where, what Lights On does is helping with the revenue management, more so maybe in the digital marketing. As we pointed out earlier, things have changed a lot in the since I got into the business, a whole lot. I mean, my hair's changed, everything's changed. But I think that's an area where usually the smaller operators, they're challenged. A lot of them just end up going the easy route and relying on OTAs exclusively, which cuts into their margins. They don't drive as, they're not going to be able to drive as high a revenue as maybe they could. So, that's what I would look at. The other area maybe, and this is, having an actual hospitality accounting firm, maybe do some books for them. Because if they should get to the point to where they want to consider selling at some point, what we find with a lot of smaller properties, owner operators, their books aren't set up to market the property. And you've got to dig through things and recreate things. And we work closely with a lot of brokers. We're constantly on the lookout for some of our ownership groups for new properties. They want to find new properties. We've been pretty successful and helping them do that. So when we look at things, or a broker looks at things, we're gonna have to work together and repackage financials to make the property marketable to a buyer. But from an ongoing market or operational status, I really think the area where as a small property, they can utilize help. It's going to be in the marketing area. How can they get out there? Can they better negotiate if they're not a branded property with the OTAs to get better rates, better margins? The brands have a plethora of soft brands out there now. I can't keep track of them. I tease the guys all the time. We go to conferences, Alice, the lodging conference and so forth. I meet with the franchise guys and they meet with us because we're based in Hawaii. The ownership is, and they all want to have Hawaii properties. Our properties in Hawaii are independent and they run really well as independents. I think we're experts at that. On the mainland, almost all of our properties, we have independents, but the majority now are branded properties. We've got Marriott, Hilton, we've got some choice product, Best Western, you name it. We've got the brands covered, and they provide certain services and they actually help us in managing those properties on the mainland. But the mainland is run differently. I can say that as a guy that grew up in the business in Hawaii and then went to the mainland and it kind of had to learn how they operate.
Mm,
It is different on the mainland.
yeah.
And so thank goodness we have Pat Mitchell, who runs our mainland operation and the team over there because they do a tremendous job in doing that. And it's it's just it helps us a lot, helps me in helping to grow the business by having such a capable team on the mainland that is so knowledgeable. They know a lot more than I do in terms of certain aspects of the mainland operation. So I'm very appreciative of that. But again, back to your question, what do you do if you're a small operator? I think the biggest area that they can get help in is somebody help with their marketing. Get the word out about their property, help them with their revenue, how to manage that, how to package things. A lot of these operators, they get into it because they think it's a romantic business. And
Which by
it's
all
not
means.
when you're a hotel operator, these people that say, "Oh, I'm going to retire and get a bed and breakfast." Well, you get ready to work a lot.
Yeah. Hey, and we shouldn't kill the owner's dream like that because I think many people getting into this game is that they want to craft that like the romantic the guest experience, right? I think kind of the gist of it is like, how can somebody smartly delegate out things that they don't want to do, right? If they don't have the right economics to afford a full management company, then Jeff, to your point, how can somebody like piecemeal delegate out, things that doesn't make sense to them to focus on creating that guest experience, whether it's going to be, having the right accounting partner, having the right, company like Lyson who can do, digital marketing, revenue optimization and things like that, so that, they can really come in and focus on the part they likely, this is a part where what attract them is coming into, building that guest experience.
Yeah, I think there could be an opportunity for something, maybe, I call it management light,
Mm,
um, to go out and provide a framework for owner operators to work under, and then to provide some sort of a review process for them. Again, this typically, if they're an owner operator with a franchise, you should have that. The franchise should help you with some of those things, but they're not going to help you with everything. So there could be some opportunities there to work with owner operators, not on a full-blown management basis. Um, the issue that could arise there, because we've somewhat done that before a little bit, is that the owners could forget that, well, no, you signed up for the management light program, not the management everyday program. So you have to make it clear, but I do think that type of service, if you could package it correctly, um, would assist a lot of people.
yeah. Um, Actually, Jeff, we should talk about it on the side because we are actually putting something together similar to that. But I will save that for another podcast. I will kind of park it for now. Because I actually just for the time being, what's one last question for you? And just by the way, because you have just a sheer amount of experience and just all the knowledge. I think at some point we gotta have to bring you back again because I just see what I got a whole list of questions we haven't got to yet. So I think it definitely worthwhile another one.
I
But
talk a lot.
and it's all good, honestly, knowledge, right? Like, you rarely find somebody with that many years of experience, being comfortable and being, and thank you for being here to share the experience. Like not that many people willing to do that. So I would definitely like shamelessly ask you again for another show because I got a lot more questions for you. But just to wrap this up today, last question for you. And as you mentioned, Hogan management right now, because with the portfolio of independence and branded properties, right? And they could operate somewhat differently, right? So having that mix, how did you think about you know, what you learn? Like, what does one teach you something that the other doesn't? And how it would make sense, especially for a property owner, right? When they create a hotel, thinking about going independent versus having a full brand versus, now sub brand is becoming much more prominent. It feels like there's just so many options for an owner to think about, if they just acquired a property, thinking about repositioning it, or thinking about they had a underperforming asset that they are thinking about using a brand potentially to help them with performance improvement. How does an owner think about that?
Well, I mean, you look at it this way. Some of it depends on where your property is located. How you're going to get the business in. Uh, Brands, they can offer a lot. We utilize um, revenue managers from the brands. We utilize, obviously, you get the marketing power. A lot of the power comes from their loyalty programs. So that's what a lot of people look at. Some brands are actually, so it depends on what the owner's goals are. And I will generally ask an owner when we start a discussion, what is your goal? What is your goal for the property? What's your long-term goal? Are you on a 3 to 5 year hold and then you're gonna sell it? Or is this a long-term hold for you? We need to know what your goals are in order to help you achieve them. So some owners, look at some of the brands as bringing value from a real estate perspective as well. So those are the owners that may be a shorter term hold. Um, but again, even if they're not, brands can bring a lot of value. I will tell you that they do make our job a little easier in some areas. Because the brand is going to come in and tell an owner, okay, here's your PIP. You need to improve your property in these areas. We don't necessarily have to do that. With an independent, we're the ones that have to go in and say, hey, this is great. This renovation worked really well 20 years ago, but it's not going to last anymore. You need to upgrade. We don't have to do that with the brands, and some of them are more stringent than others on that. But like I said, we work with a broad range of brands, and I think our team's pretty expert at working with them. So for an owner, looking at it from that perspective, and from our perspective, we like the brands on the mainland. It's a different it's a different atmosphere over there. Again, you got to look at your location. If you were in a hotel in Anaheim near Disneyland, you're always going to have guests. So you have a little more flexibility. You'd be surprised the number of little independent properties that operate around there. And then you've got the big guys. They all do well. But if you're and vice versa. If you're a small 70-room hotel on Interstate 5 in California and you're basically on an off ramp, well, a guest is probably going to choose a branded hotel versus the Saddleback Inn that's an independent that they have no idea what they're going to get, right? So you've got to look at different factors to determine what's going to work best for each property. some of our independents have been independents for a long time. They've got an established clientele. And one in particular happens to be in Silicon Valley. So it operates very well as an independent. And we wouldn't advise them unless something changed to go with a brand. They don't need to have that. So and it comes down to economics, what works well for you. The one thing I will say on either side is a lot of owners look at, they look at a management fee. They look at the cost of hiring somebody like lights on, and or just going to be a branded property and paying a franchise fee. And they say, well, we can't afford that. Well, what I generally tell them and what always I would say 99.5% of the time ends up being true is we pay for ourselves because their revenue goes up, their operating costs, generally don't go up or go down because you get more buying power. And the same goes with a brand. If you're in a location where the brand's going to help you, then you don't worry about the fee. Start looking at the revenue that's going to be generated, bringing it in. And if you're looking at, again, a management company, a marketing company, a revenue management company, or getting involved with a brand, you're looking at them for a reason because you're not getting the business that you feel you should have, or you're not getting the business that you feel you should have at the rate you feel you should have.
Yep.
So again, I think all of it pays for itself. And if you have a management company, well, you're not the guy at 1 o'clock in the morning getting the call that says, "Hey, the night auditor just went out sick. We need somebody." The management company is going to get that. You don't want to be that person.
Yeah, and hey, everyone's working so hard for building wealth and all that through owning hotels and assets. It's like they want to get that time back, right? So I think it should be a life goal for any hoteliers to be at some point just like sitting like relaxed, knowing that everything is being run well versus like I'm sure all of us, growing up in this industry, we all had to go through the crucible of, putting out fires left and right. I think, everyone should go through that process to learn how hard it could be just, doing any aspects of hospitality to a point that they deserve, and, afford having the right people playing on their side to, enjoy the fruit of their labor. So I think that everyone should be thinking that as like a life goal to finding ways to get the time back and have the professional really operate the best out of the assets.
Yeah, and there's a fear in some owners that if they bring in a management company, that they're not going to have any involvement, or the management company is going to come in and tell them, stay away, we're doing this, or you have to do that, and it's in the agreement, and so forth. And that can be true in some aspects. I like to think that because we're small, because we're family owned, and again, we have patient owners and understandable owners. I like to think that we created this term, but it seems like everybody's using it these days, is that we view ourselves as an owner-centric management company. In other words, we look at it from a owner's perspective first, and we want to provide, we want to run the property like we were the owner. So we're flexible and how we approach things, way more flexible than I've ever seen working through very many companies, and how we approach and the type of owner involvement that we allow in their properties. So it's not something that owners should be afraid of. They just need to recognize that it's another tool. It's convenience for them. I'd like to say that it's going to make them more money, and they're not going to get that call at 1 o'clock in the morning.
That's the key. That's the key. Well, Geoff, if anyone just wanting to have a conversation or just assessments of their situation, where can people learn more about you and Hogan Hospitality?
Well, our website is hoganhospitalitygroup.com, and you can reach me at Geoff, spelled Geoff, at hoganhospitalitygroup.com.
We'll definitely put everything on the show notes so audience can definitely find it there. We've been talking to Geoff Graf, VP of Business Development at Hogan Hospitality Group. Geoff, thank you so much. Such a great conversation today.
Thank you, Ken. We appreciate everything you do.
Thanks for listening to the Lights On podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.